Well, hi everybody, and this is week 4 of our little examination of Wayne Dyer's movie Ambition to Meaning. And as I pointed out in the first week and in the introduction to this, Wayne Dyer actually has a very similar approach that the 12 steps have. And they both talk about, both Wayne Dyer and the steps talk about this thing called the ego. And the ego is the thing driving the addiction. And one of our jobs, says Wayne Dyer and the steps, is to get the ego out of the picture and start looking at the real human being. And to help you understand this, Bill Wilson had a psychiatrist, and his name was Harry Tiebout, pretty famous psychiatrist. And Harry Tiebout was trained in traditional Freudian psychoanalysis, or classical Freudian psychoanalysis as it's called, which means he was a firm believer in this thing called the ego. Ego is a concept developed by Sigmund Freud. Anyway, Harry Tiebout, who had, in fact, not only Bill Wilson had he treated, but also Marty Mann, who is generally considered the first woman in Alcoholics Anonymous. But by dealing with these people, he came up with this idea of what addicts were. And basically, he used very scientific language because they were all published in psychiatric scholarly journals. But he would basically say, look, the addict is grandiose, he's self-centered, and unless he gets out of that grandiosity and self-centeredness, like, he's in big trouble. Or in other words, to use the Freudian language, unless he gets over his egocentricity, where he allows his ego to run himself, then he's in big trouble. And the ego, by the way, according to Freud, was a bit of a wimpy thing. But the key thing about the ego was it was always directed to the outside world. And so this was a big problem for addicts, because as I mentioned last week, for example, lots of addicts wear a mask. Oh, they can be horribly hungover and suffering and broke and everything. And someone says, "How you doing, buddy?" And they say, "Oh, great, I'm doing great," right? So they feel that they have to present a certain image to the outside world. But so people like Harry Tiebout and Wayne Dyer too actually said, well, we've got to get rid of this ego thing, this ego-driven life, because it's just useless. And so one of the lessons you can take from the 12-step program, because it's actually quite brilliantly designed for this, is to follow what it calls the spiritual principles. And some of the spiritual principles, as you all know, are things like humility, surrender, open-mindedness, all those kinds of things, right? And so if you have someone who's totally arrogant and self-centered, then the 12 steps can help you by suggesting, like, try being humble. Yeah. Try to practice the idea that maybe you are not the center of the universe, that other people are valuable. Reach out to them, right? Volunteer, it says in step 12. Help your poor suffering addict. That'll help you break out of this ego-centeredness that is a part of the addiction. And so you can learn quite a bit from the spiritual principles of the 12-step program. And even in much of step 4, in fact, if you do it the way it says to do it in the big book, in chapter 5, I mean, it actually talks about this whole idea. It gives the example of jealousy, and then so say, well, I'm jealous, and then to look at it, and you will discover very quickly that this is your ego at work here, and not the authentic human being behind it. So the 12-step principles are actually designed to help you get rid of the ego out of your life, and if you follow them according to the program, right, you will get this spiritual awakening, and you will get great recovery by following the principles of the program. Anyway, some lessons from the 12-step program. So next week we'll have our final chapter on Wayne Dyer's movie, and I'll see you then.